I'm Natalie, and at 28 years old, I work a steady job. 8 months ago, my beloved grandfather, who raised me, passed away. Today is significant because the lawyer will be reading his will, which is why I am visiting my grandfather's house alongside my sister Allison. Allison is 4 years older than me and the only family I have left. We lost our parents in an accident 2 decades ago, and since then, our grandparents took us under their wing. Unfortunately, after our grandmother died from an illness a few years back, my grandfather's health and spirits progressively worsened. Out of deep concern, I moved into an apartment nearby to keep an eye on him. Despite his gentle chiding that I should stop coming back and live independently, he always welcomed me with a warm chuckle. On one particularly routine visit, I was met with a heart-wrenching scene, my grandfather in agony at the front door. In a panic, I called for an ambulance, but he passed away shortly after that incident. Hey, snap out of it, will you? Make some tea, at least, Allison's voice yanked me back to the present. I agreed and walked into the kitchen. Catching a glimpse of her lounging carelessly, stretching her legs and yawning, I couldn't help but notice her potent perfume still filled the air, prompting a grimace from me. She's the same as ever, I whispered to myself, placing the kettle on the stove. Allison has always been self-involved. As a teenager, she began to dye her hair and associated with questionable friends. Her demands for money without contributing through a job were routine. Despite the trouble she caused, requiring our grandparents to often step in and apologize, she remained unaffected. As the quieter sibling, I frequently found myself cleaning up the aftermath of her actions. Even now, as an adult, she hasn't changed much. She lacks a stable job and drifts from one part-time copywriter to another. I'm aware she had been quietly seeking financial support from our grandfather when I wasn't around. It wasn't hard to conclude that some things might never change. Allison would have likely found the whole ordeal of attending the will reading too bothersome if it weren't for the potential inheritance involved. Her interest was clearly piqued, as evidenced by the shift in her demeanor when the lawyer arrived. Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for coming today, Allison greeted with an unusually high-pitched, formal tone, signaling the lawyer's arrival. I quickly scooped tea leaves into the teapot and made my way to the entrance. Thank you for coming, I echoed as I greeted the lawyer, whom I had met previously at the funeral. His eyes reminded me of my grandfather's, gentle and reassuring. The shiny badge of his profession was prominently displayed on his chest. After we paid respects in front of my grandfather's portrait, the lawyer accepted the tea I offered and proceeded to unveil the will, which my grandfather had entrusted to him during his lifetime. The contents of the will were straightforward. My older sister, Allison, was to inherit $58 million in cash, while I, the younger daughter, was to inherit the house and the land it stood on. Upon hearing this, Allison erupted into laughter. $20 million in cash for the elder daughter and just an old house for the younger one? How hilarious. It suits someone as plain as you. It's not just the house, there's also the land, I replied, trying to sound firm, but Allison only snickered. The value of this land in such a forgotten place is hardly surprising. I would have preferred cash. I guess Grandpa really did have a soft spot for me after all, she remarked, her voice dripping with condescension. While I felt a sting from her words, I couldn't help but think that perhaps my grandfather wanted me to preserve the home and land where he and my grandmother had spent their lives. A house and land, that's pretty awesome, isn't it? Roman, my boyfriend, exclaimed with surprise when I shared the story with him later. I shook my head, indicating that it wasn't as grand as it sounded. Not really, I replied, my thoughts clouded with mixed feelings about the inheritance and the responsibilities it entailed. My sister, Allison, inherited $58 million in cash. Saying it out loud left a hollow feeling inside me, as if voicing it somehow cemented the reality. Despite my attempt to stay modest, acknowledging her fortune felt like a bitter affirmation. Wow, beautiful and rich, now she's got it all. Talk about a winning combo, Roman commented, perhaps a bit too carelessly, shot him a sidelong glance, stung by his thoughtless words. Sensing his mistake, he quickly added, "Your happiness means more to me than any amount of money, Natalie. Roman and I have been dating since I started my current job. We met at a networking event, and being close in age, we hit it off right away. I've introduced him to both my grandfather and Allison. Though he hasn't proposed yet, the idea of marriage has been on my mind, especially today, which felt like an unexpected first date set against the backdrop of my inheritance discussion. Perhaps I shared the news because I see a future with him as my husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I might regret this openness later. A few days after the will reading, I found myself at the family home I'd inherited. My plan was to clean and organize my grandfather's belongings. The property was expansive, yet the house itself was quite modest. As I walked through the empty rooms, I considered the practicality of moving in. It was close to my work, and the idea of living there, perhaps with a cat for company, seemed quite appealing. There'd be no rent, and although maintenance costs might arise due to wear and tear, my savings should cover it. Maybe, I thought, even Roman could join me here someday. Blushing at my own forward thinking, I shook my head vigorously and rolled up my sleeves, ready to start cleaning. Just then, my phone rang. It was Allison. Her name flashing on the screen made me hesitate before answering. "Sis, what's up?" "Hey, Natalie. Having fun all by yourself in that old house?" Her voice sounded slurred, likely from drinking. Allison has always had a flair for drawing out her words, but today, her slurred speech was particularly noticeable. "You're drinking, aren't you?" "It's still early," I said, a bit exasperated. "Oh, you're such a Miss Goody Two-Shoes," she retorted with an exaggerated sigh. It was clear she'd been drinking. I was considering the possibility of moving into the inherited house. "I was thinking about moving here eventually," I told her, hoping to quickly steer the conversation away from her antics. "Really?" "I'm currently enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel," she boasted, her voice growing louder. "Guess who I'm with right now?" "I have no idea," I responded, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Boring. It's that kind of attitude that'll make Roman dislike you," she teased, a hint of malice in her voice. "What?" I was confused. "I'm sorry, Natalie," came an unexpected voice. It was Roman, taking the phone from Allison. His sudden involvement left me reeling, my mind racing with questions and a growing sense of betrayal. "Surprised, huh?" Allison's voice returned, now dripping with triumph. "Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Roman was quite a catch. I knew where he worked because of you, and I approached him as soon as he left work today. He didn't hesitate when I invited him." Her words hit me like a punch. "He told me that I am hundreds of times more attractive than you," she continued, her voice filled with boastful pride. I listened in stunned silence, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Natalie, I'm really sorry," Roman's voice came through again, breaking the heavy silence. "Tell me it's a mistake," I managed to say, barely whispering. "As a man, I had to take this opportunity," he said, his voice betraying a hint of regret yet filled with a troubling justification. "I do feel bad about it, but come on, it's impossible to resist a beautiful woman." His words were a devastating blow, revealing not just his betrayal but also the shallow justification for his actions. Allison had access to $58 million, and the dismissive tone Roman used, almost pleading for my understanding, left me emotionally void. I felt a chill, as if my very spirit was being siphoned away. "You know what? I don't need a man like you," I declared firmly. In the background, Allison's laughter boomed through the phone, mocking my pain. The call switched back to Allison. "Well, that's how it is. From now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke," she sneered before hanging up, crushed by a wave of delayed emotions. All I could do was sob. 3 years later, I found myself in a much different place. A cat curled up in my lap, purring softly as it slept, while I sat in front of my laptop on a day off, still with some work to finish. "Oh no, this won't get the work done," I muttered, feeling guilty for needing to disturb the peaceful creature. Just as I reached to gently lift the cat, my phone began to ring. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered without suspicion. Hello? Natalie, long time no see. The voice was unmistakable. It was Allison, her distinctive tone chillingly familiar. It's you, Natalie, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister, she said, as if no time had passed. 3 years had made Allison 29, yet her manner of speaking hadn't changed at all. A smirk played at the corner of my mouth. You're just the same, I responded dryly. By the way, I came home and there's a hotel standing. Did you sell the house? She inquired, her voice tinged with curiosity. That's none of your business, I retorted sharply. Oh come on, it's quite a grand hotel, huh? You must have made a good chunk of change, huh? Her words were probing, seeking information. Growing tired of the conversation, I was about to end the call when Allison began spilling details about her current predicament. According to her, she had squandered the entire inheritance within 3 years and was now buried under a significant amount of debt. Roman, who was still in the picture, seemed to be just as financially submerged. I was utterly speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less about her problems, yet there she was asking, so lend me some money. Allison's voice escalated, but I responded with a calm that surprised even me. I've always wondered why Grandpa divided his estate the way he did, but the day you took Roman from me and severed our ties, I finally understood. I began, my words measured and slow. It had been 3 years since Roman and I had broken up, a breakup that left me devastated. After crying relentlessly, I had sat numbly in my room, my mind blank as I stared into space. I'm such a fool, I whispered, and as I did, tears began to fall once again. My eyes landed on a painting I had made as a child, a gift to my grandfather. He had cherished it enough to frame it and display it prominently. Feeling a rush of nostalgia mixed with loneliness, I got up and took the painting off the wall. As I held it, something slipped from behind the frame, a fresh sheet of note paper. I recalled how, when I was little, I used to hide notes behind this painting, exchanging secret messages with my grandfather. It was like our private journal. Knowing I would inherit the house, he must have guessed I'd eventually find this note. The realization made me shudder at the thought of how easily I might have missed it. To Natalie, the note began, dated just before my grandfather passed away. I knew you'd find this letter. You're probably wondering why I divided my estate as I did, cash to your sister and an old house and land for you. It might seem like I favored Allison, but that's not the case. Despite any appearances of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, who cared for me until the end. As I read on, I finally grasped what had been troubling me. No matter what, Grandpa thought more of me, huh? It was a realization that hit deep, especially recalling how deeply Allison's words had hurt me at the time. Despite my deeper connection and love for our grandfather, a part of me had always felt a twinge of jealousy. I continued to read the letter, where he addressed this very issue, but Allison would not have been satisfied with a regular division. Even as her grandfather, I must admit, his words revealed a profound understanding of our characters, and through this letter, he reassured me of his love and thoughtfulness, even in his final decisions. Allison's greed was beyond measure, a fact that even Grandpa had recognized. In my heart, I often imagined telling him how she had even snatched my boyfriend away. That's why I arranged it this way, Grandpa's voice echoed through his letter. At first glance, it seemed Allison got the better deal, but he knew she wouldn't bother with my inheritance. According to the letter, the value of the land I inherited was on the rise due to urban development. At the time of writing, it hadn't reached the worth of Allison's $58 million, but its potential for future appreciation was significant. This revelation widened my eyes in surprise. Grandpa's foresight was laid out clearly. I could either hold on to the land if I felt attached, or sell it once its value increased significantly. All he wanted was for me to be happy. As I relayed the contents of the letter, Allison scoffed and muttered, "Hag." I lived in the house for a while, and as my personal life began to stabilize, I decided to sell, just as Grandpa suggested. The value of the land had indeed risen. "I'm never lending you money," I declared firmly. Frustrated but cunning as ever, Allison made a last-ditch offer. "Fine, if you want, I can give Roman back to you. Help your sister out, it's a good deal, right?" Something inside me snapped at that moment. Enough is enough. You've been taken care of by Grandpa, and yet you show no gratitude. I despise you for that. You're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Roman, and I certainly don't want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. With that, I ended the call, quickly setting up call blocking. My cat, sensing the tension, cowered on the bed. I picked him up and soothed him, "I'm sorry." Later, I learned that Allison and Roman, perhaps misunderstanding my intentions, stormed into the house I had sold, loudly proclaiming themselves as my relatives. The irony was thick. They seemed to think I still owned the place, which was now the site of a respectable inn, an enterprise I had no part in anymore. For those three, simplicity was never a forte. I had moved on, both from the land and from them, carving out a peaceful life with new beginnings. Believing they were still entitled to the property, Allison and Roman caused quite a scene at the inn that now stood on the land I had sold. The staff, unable to handle their disruptive behavior, called the police. The two were arrested after they damaged several items within the inn. During the investigation, it was revealed that they had been involved in marriage fraud schemes to swindle money. It looked like they would be facing prison time together. Was briefly questioned by the police due to my prior connections to them, but I quickly demonstrated that we had been estranged for years and had no involvement in their current schemes. I was cleared and released shortly thereafter. As my husband came to pick me up from the station, we heard shouting. Turning around, I saw Allison and Roman being escorted by the police. They were hardly recognizable, their hair unkempt, clothes worn and shabby, a far cry from how I remembered them, especially Allison, who had always been meticulously groomed. They didn't see us as they were probably being moved to another location. Watching them, a wave of melancholy washed over me. My husband and I exchanged a glance that conveyed more than words could. He reached out his hand, and as I took it, we left the police station together. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. "I'm okay. I have you and this little one," I replied, placing a hand on my noticeably pregnant belly and smiling. Inside, our future child was growing, a new chapter about to begin. Money certainly plays a crucial role in life, but as we walked away, I thought about the deeper values I hope to instill in our child, values of love, family, and integrity, which are far more precious than any material wealth. With my husband by my side, I felt ready to teach our child these lessons.